we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's May 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And Cheska Dainha.
Good morning, everyone.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, Instagram on Sunday afternoon wouldn't work for several hours. The app's feed was frozen and users couldn't log in or refresh their page. The social media company spokesperson later said they'd fixed the technical issue, but didn't explain the exact causes. Moving on to the next story. Also on Sunday, Netflix announced that it's currently holding talks over possibly releasing a special episode of the film series Persona, featuring the late K-pop artist and actress Seoul. Before she took her own life in 2019, Seoul played a main character in the second season of Persona. As of now, no final decision has been made regarding the release. Last but not least, the Korea Meteorological Administration announced its forecast for Typhoon Mawar. The typhoon, which started off the coast of Guam on Saturday, is expected to move towards Japan's Okinawa, with wind strengths reaching the second highest at very strong. Now, this is when winds are as fast as 160 kilometers per hour, and weather analysts say that they're strong enough to make stones fly about. The wind strengths we'll be seeing from Typhoon Mawar are similar to the ones we saw last August from Typhoon Hinnamnor. Now, the KMA is yet to say whether Mawar will directly affect South Korea. And that was our news feed for this Tuesday. Moving on to today's discussion topic. Now, we've talked about low birth rates and a growing number of millennials and Gen Z deciding not to even get married a few times on News Gen, but we haven't yet dug deeper into the reasons why many young people are delaying or completely given up on having children. And today we're going to look at one of the many reasons. Walter, I remember last Friday when you were on the show,
Yes.
you, Nael, and I actually talked about this, right?
Yeah, we did. We talked about it in deep, and it was shocking to actually hear some of the results.
And if you want to find out what we talked about, take a look at the screen to find out what we're going to be talking about for today's discussion topic. Thank you everyone for watching. We are News Generation. Alright, 고생 많으셨습니다. 고생 많으셨습니다. Walter, how's the baby these days?
She's doing all right, I guess.
Oh, wait, dude, speaking of babies, aren't you guys doing that episode next week about how much it costs to raise a child?
Oh yeah, I'm doing that show.
Did you guys take that quiz?
What quiz?
The one about like how much it takes. You can choose different options for education and what kind of things you're gonna get.
No.
I did it.
How much did it cost you?
For one child, it was $2 million.
A
little over $2 million.
But for only one child?
Just one child.
Geez, well, listen, I don't know if that's so accurate because I feel like I've already spent $2 million already just on my child.
And she's not even 1 year old.
She gets all the good stuff.
Oh my god. But you should totally try it. It's kind of fun because you get to choose different things.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to do it right now then. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great weekend. See ya. See ya. Bye. After hearing my colleagues needed huge amounts of money to raise a child, I wanted to find out how much it would cost me. So apparently, there's this website that helps me calculate how much it'll cost me to have a child here in Korea, and I'm going to try it out right now. All right. A list of different and very specific scenarios were provided. I had to choose whether or not I would throw my child a 돌잔치, a Korean tradition celebrating the first birthday of a baby. If so, I had to choose how much I would spend on hiring a photographer or renting traditional clothing. I guess this is where I'll be spending the most money on educational fees because it's hard not to send your kid off to private tutoring or academies, especially if you're a double-income household. And it says here, if you take a look at it, based on my average monthly household income, I would only be able to spend around $365 a month for my elementary school kid. So it's going to be costing me $562,000 for one kid, and that's minus the cost of buying a house. And it's asking me, what would I like to do? Do I still want a kid, or is it not that necessary? I guess I have no choice. I won't be able to have kids for a while. And as you guys just saw in the video right now, I won't be able to have kids for a while. because it's going to be costing me $562,000 to raise a child in Korea. And if I'm very honest, I was restraining myself from picking the best options because I was afraid that the final receipt would be too pricey. And this excluded the costs that I would be having to pour into my housing. So I realized no wonder young people are not trying to have kids, you know? And Walter, it seems like South Korea, as you mentioned before, seems to be the most expensive place to be raising a child right now, and you're doing so.
He's nodding in silence.
Yeah, I can see tears in your eyes, actually.
Yes, there's a lot of tears being shed. Well, as the only panelist here with a child, let me tell you young people what to expect. And it definitely sure feels that way here in Korea. Like, since the birth of my daughter, my wife, who is very careful with our finances and really does her research, not to buy the most expensive products, but the most useful products at an affordable cost. Now, let's just actually take a look at the screen to actually compare what it is like to live in Korea and other countries. So Korea is the highest has the highest cost of raising a child by the age of 18, 7.79 times higher GPD per person. This is China. Next is China, sorry, which is 6.9 times. This is 2 to 3 times higher than Germany, Australia, and France, which is kind of make me thinking, why did I decide to move to South Korea to raise a child when I could go back to Australia where it's 3 times less?
Yeah.
But this is also down to one's own sacrifices. You can raise a child on a shoestring budget, and some families have no choice but to do that. But even in Korea, raising a child as cheaply as possible is still quite expensive for some.
And why don't we analyze the reasons of why raising a child in Korea is so expensive?
I can definitely talk about the education aspect because my parents had to raise the 3 of us, both in Korea and in the States. So you can just imagine the kind of the educational cost that they had to pour into. But in Korea, a lot of private education is almost a prerequisite because 8 out of 10 students do private education aside from just going to their public schools. So imagine your classmates, going to, drawing classes or math classes and you're left alone. You obviously want to be a part of it as well, right? And people spend almost a third of their income into pouring into private education. So Walter's already there sighing with his shoulders heavy. But this is sort of what happens, I guess, after you grow a certain age. But I would love to hear what happens even before you get to that age.
Right, and you know what? With more people doing double income, no children, or even if they have a child, they still have to have double income because the living costs are just so exponentially high. But Walter, as Cheska asked you right now, why do you think it's so expensive to raise a child in Korea?
Well, I guess, as Cheska mentioned, education is something that is very popular here in Korea. I mean, compared to other countries, when I grew up in Australia, there were not as many after-school programs or hagwons, as we call them, here in Korea. From my experience, it actually starts even way before that, as Cheska would like to know, that it starts even from basically day dot that you know you're pregnant. Okay? So I knew I was pregnant quite early, but there
were some signs.
There were some signs, I was getting a bit bloated, but there
Frankie.
were, getting quotes for insurance about your baby. I mean, that starts before even the baby is born. Visiting the obstetrician on like a bi-weekly to monthly basis. Ultrasounds, obviously, as well, to check up on the baby. And in Korea, we do have, certain, advanced ultrasounds, which come at a certain cost if you want to know more about your baby's health. Once the baby is born as well, we go into what's called Joriwon, which is sort of after-service care for women who have just given birth. That means they need to, look after their body as well as get the infant care, making sure the infant is well and healthy. But saying all that there, I do feel that here in Korea we do tend to, let's say, have extra precaution than other countries. Let's say in Australia, I don't remember getting this good of a treatment that I'm giving my daughter. But
your parents are watching.
Yeah, I mean, mum and dad, what are you doing? Look at me. For God.
How did you raise me?
I mean, we don't even go out 100 days before the baby reaches 100 days. So it just depends on the parent, but this is parent by parent.
Right, and looking at it from a positive perspective, when I was trying to do that child cost-bearing calculator thing, the website that we showed in the video, there were so many different options I could choose from, which made me realize South Korea does have really good infrastructure for you to have a child.
Exactly.
It's just that, can you afford it? It's really expensive. Now, how do all of this affect young, aspiring parents or millennials and Gen Z?
I don't think it's any secret, and the reason that we're having this conversation so many times is that it's no secret that young people are refraining from having children for this reason. I mean, they even use the term opportunity cost for having a child versus having to choose their career path or even living the life that they possibly want to, maybe traveling, taking on a job that may not require for them to clock in 9 to 7 and, you know, being able to do the things that they have dreamed of. So, I mean, I have to be honest, I love my career, so I personally am also very cautious of having a children for that reason as well, because if I do, I want to give them the best quality of education, my time and attention, which has to be allocated differently if I have a child.
You have to pick and choose what your priorities are at that point.
Yeah.
And no wonder we're seeing such a low fertility rate, actually the lowest in the world here in South Korea. But despite all these high living costs, you have decided to have a child. So why don't you explain to us how, you know, these really expensive costs affect other millennials and Gen Z
This
parents?
is a great discussion.
Yeah. So like as I briefly mentioned last week as well, that, you know, it wasn't actually our plan to have a child, and then we thought about our future and thought, you know, maybe bringing a child into this world is something that we should consider, and we have. But we always knew that the cost was going to really be burdensome. And I honestly think it's a failing society when one of the reasons why people decide not to have children is because that it's too expensive.
Right.
There are many people out there who want to have children but literally can't afford to have them.
Exactly.
And that's a failing society in my opinion. I mean, just for the average family, not let's say the rich families, but the average family, it puts a lot of financial pressure on this. My wife and I want to have a lot of positive influence on our daughter, and as Jessica mentioned, we want to give them that time, but unfortunately, in order for us to afford all these, let's say, I wouldn't say luxury goods, but like anything to keep our baby alive or healthy or even like well educated, we have to both work. We're not rich, we're the average working person. So, but what is really interesting that I found out is that child products actually saw a $3 billion increase between 2015 and 2020.
3 billion.
This is actually down to a recent trend called 10 pocket. Now, some saying that since there are families usually with one child, so for instance, I have one child and I have a sister-in-law and a brother-in-law. They don't look like they're gonna have a child, so what they're doing is spending a lot of money onto our daughter, and this is actually boosting the child product industry. So though, you know, it's expensive, people are still buying products.
Quite interesting to see in a country with such low birth rates, we're still seeing baby products go up in sales.
It's very similar to like China when they have one child policy and the entire family pours their love and money and shower the children.
And speaking of China, why don't we go around the world to see how much it costs other countries to, you know, raise a child in other parts of the world, starting with you, Walter.
Well, okay, so I grew up in Australia, so I'm going to give you Australia as an example. And as you saw on the chart before, that it was on the lower end of the list. Still, technically, they would say it's quite high, but when you compare it to Korea, obviously, it's nowhere near it. Now, according to Choosy Cost of Kids Report 2023, it is estimated that the average family per household spends roughly 10 to 13,000 Australian dollars, which works out to be around 8,000 US dollars. So it seems so very cheap. Childcare being the most expensive thing, which is things like obviously education or your hospital fees, followed by nappies, hygiene, and then let's say things like necessities like car seats, etc. But this obviously depends family by family, but if you're working on an average budget, between 12 to 13,000 Australian dollars is very, very cheap compared to Korea. My wife's saying, you know, I've already spent that much, and our daughter is like 3 months old now, so it's not even been a year, so it's just crazy.
And very briefly, why don't we look into one more other country?
Yes, I can definitely give you the example of the United States because that's where I was educated. The one very interesting thing that I noticed is the percentage of people receiving private education is nowhere compared to South Korea, where almost 80% people do. do. But in the States, what I notice is the type and the quality of private education that people get is slightly different. So we're talking about more elite or social advances, so like equestrian classes, private tutors, or traveling around the world seasonally to get different experiences. So it is not for grades, but more for the purpose of how do I groom my children to excel in this society.
I think it's quite different because in Korea, private education seems to be the norm. It's more mainstream.
Exactly right.
All right, so no doubt Korea does seem to have higher childbearing costs compared to other parts of the world, but as we're seeing birth rates decline globally, it'd be a good idea for officials to think of ways to alleviate young parents' financial burden. So let's hear from an expert to look for ways to do so. One of the main hurdles hindering people from giving birth is the high cost of raising a child. That's why we're going to hear from a social researcher with expertise in fertility and demographics. It's Baek Ji-sun. Great to have you here on our show again, Ji-sun.
Thank you so much for having me again.
All right, Ji-sun, so as we've been discussing here in the studio, we talked about what is causing the costs of having children in Korea so high. But compared to other parts of the world, why do you think Korea has exceptionally expensive costs?
So there are some universal factors that affect childbearing cost, such as high housing cost and the rising cost of living in general. Apart from this, I would like to talk about three factors that are prominent in Korea. Firstly, Korea lacks a flexible working system. When both parents work until 6 p.m., they often need additional childcare services to babysit their children. However, if one of them could start work earlier and finish earlier, they would not need to spend extra money on it. Secondly, the luxury culture in the child product industry also lead to unnecessary costs for parents. Korea has one of the biggest kids designer brand industries. These companies do not consider what would be best for children. Instead, the target audience for these luxury products for kids is parents, and the companies benefit from it. This strategy works, and parents end up spending unnecessary money on this product. Lastly, the competitive culture in Korean society and the schools contribute to a higher childbearing cost. Private educations like Hagwon, which are often considered crucial for child success, place additional financial pressure on parents. I believe this is the most problematic factor affecting childbearing costs in Korea.
For sure.
It seems very familiar to me, to be honest with you. So are there any welfare policies here in Korea or any other countries that try to bring this financial burden for parents down?
So in general, there are financial assistances available in many countries, including Korea. Several governments provide direct financial support to families through child allowances or family credit. They also offer child care services such as daycare centers or after-school programs. However, these policies do not effectively address the issue of high expenditure on private educations in Korea.
Right.
And I think lastly, we're trying to make the situation obviously better here everywhere. And a lot of millennials think that it's up to the government to change the social structure. What is your opinion on that?
Certainly, the responsibility of raising children should not solely rest on parents. Even in the most challenging circumstance where parents are unable to fulfill their roles, children still should have the opportunity to thrive, not just meet their basic needs. This responsibility falls upon society and the government. However, is striving enough in Korean society? Like, is it acceptable for 8 years old to try to discover the world instead of studying until 10 p.m. every night?
Very true.
Even if my children and I are okay with this, does that mean it's considered acceptable in Korean society? So, most Koreans would believe that a competitive culture is one of the primary factors driving parents to spend substantial amount of money. And this culture also has detrimental effect on the mental health of countless children.
It really
However, yeah, exactly. However, would parents be fine if the government were to ban private tutoring? Would they be satisfied if the government were to establish equal entry requirement for our universities so our children wouldn't face any stigmatization based on their chosen institution? I don't think so.
Right, it's definitely a very tricky situation that will still need a lot more discussions and questioning about. All right, thank you so much, Jisun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ji-sun.
Thank you.
All right, before we move on to the latter parts of our discussions, we're going to be hearing from our global viewers. So take a look at the screen on what they had to say about today's discussion topic. Alex Winnie said the UK is one of the most expensive places in Europe to raise a child. I think it's around 300k pounds. Now, I was raised on ramen noodles and had to steal clothes when I couldn't make enough doing construction, landscaping, and other work under the table since everybody loves to exploit child labor, and that was from ETX. Doina Arhire said in Romania nowadays, prices are skyrocketing, yet children are a blessing. Thinking about the money, it depends from family to family, but my opinion, one middle-class family needs around 500 euros per month for a child. So it seems to be a problem everywhere. It's really expensive to raise a child in other parts of the world. So how would you guys like to see more affordable options for parents, and which way should South Korea go?
Well, I think obviously, as Ji-sun mentioned, the government does have these incentives that are available for parents, but it really isn't enough, to be honest with you. Even though we are receiving, and I am receiving these incentives, at the end of the day, we are still spending more than what we were without the child. I mean, we don't expect the government to pay for everything.
Right.
But we do need them to help out. And it is really hard to say what needs fixing. I mean, as she mentioned, it wasn't just the things for child necessities, but also housing prices. And just the cost of living by yourself is overly expensive. So to bring another life into the world and then having to pay for triple what you were doing before, it's hard to know where to start, to be honest with you.
And not to mention the societal culture. One fascinating point she mentioned was children's designer clothes. It seems like in order for your child not to be isolated, you need to catch up to that fashion trend. But any other ideas you have?
I just want to add that there's a social temperature that also needs to change. Obviously, government policy and subsidy and support is absolutely crucial, as you just said. But also, we already live in a society where competition is high, where the labor law does not support parents to work both and try to raise the child and keep the attention. So all of these societal things also needs to change for us to really feel like it's safe to have children.
Right, and the change of perspective, in order for this hyper-competitive societal culture to change, we need to be changing our perspectives as well.
Absolutely.
All right, and that's all we have for you on News Gen today, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Walter Lee
Lovely to be here.
and Cheska Dainhong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.